In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. When they had lived there for about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons or her husband.
Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had had consideration for his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find security, each of you, in the house of your husband." Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they are grown? Would you refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me."
Then they wept aloud. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She replied to them, "Call me no longer Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Our scripture reading, Ecclesiastes 4:9-12. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fail, or if they fall, one will lift up the other. But woe to one who is alone and falls and does not have another to help. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though one might prevail against another, two will withstand one. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. May God add his understanding to the scriptures.
So that big old passage that we read from the book of Ruth, that is a foundational story of the Bible. I like it because I know these people. In my 33 years of ministry in the Christian church, I've run into them many times. And I imagine you know them too. Folks who have been forced to move away from the place that they call home because of circumstances that are beyond their control. In Ruth and Naomi's time, it was a famine that drove Naomi's family out of Judah into Moab. But here in Butte County, it's been the Camp Fire, the Dixie Fire, the Park Fire that has been responsible for driving people out of their homes to settle in unfamiliar places. And then there are the folks who fled from one of these places only to settle in a place that was threatened to be destroyed by another wildfire. Some people just can't seem to catch a break. Their lives seem like a series of tragic events that makes them wonder, does God have it out for me? Is it too much for me just to expect a little break every now and then? So yes, I know Naomi, and so do you. Naomi is the person who tragedy seems to follow. Naomi's family was driven from their home in the town of Bethlehem in Judah into a town of strangers, into a land of strangers who worshiped unfamiliar gods, and where most of her biological relatives died, leaving her with only two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. And eventually, Naomi learned that the famine back in Judah had ended, so she decided to return home. And she figured it would be better to be a poor widow in her hometown of Bethlehem than in Moab. Her daughters-in-law started the journey with her. But then Naomi said, no, you all go back to your families. You are citizens of Moab. You don't need to follow an old widow lady to a place where you'll be considered strangers. You've seen enough loss and grief. Moab is your home. You've got family there who will take care of you. Just let me go home and be miserable by myself. Go on now. Get. Now, of course, there was a lot of crying and grief because even though these two young women weren't biologically related to Naomi, they were emotionally bonded to her. And Orpah, she finally went back home as Naomi had asked. But Ruth, she had different plans. She was stubborn, and she was not about to let go of this poor woman who had faced many hardships of being a widow in those days. And she says, no, I'm going with you. And Naomi, she tried to play the, oh, I refuse to be burdened by you card on Ruth, but that was not going to work. Ruth said, listen, you don't get to tell me that I have to leave you. You don't get to tell me who my family is or isn't. You don't get to tell me to quit following you, because where you go, I will go. Where you settle is where I will settle. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. In fact, where you die, I will die, and I'll be buried there till death do us part. Stubborn, aren't they? Again, I know these people, and so do you, right? We've seen this story played out in so many times and places and different ways. Someone who's feeling lonely and isolated but doesn't want to be a burden on anybody decides to withdraw and face their problems alone. They isolate. They push people away. And then a loved one who is dedicated to sharing their loved one's burden says, you don't have to do this alone. Now, this scenario doesn't play out this way every time. In fact, more often than not, the more common thing that happens is that people choose the path of Orpah. They'll say, okay, fine. If you don't want my help, then I'm not going to push myself on you. I'm not happy about this situation at all, but this is your choice, not mine. And I'm not saying her choice was wrong. Okay? Don't get me wrong there. When she was weeping too, right? She indicated that she didn't want Naomi to go alone. But when Naomi said, go on, Orpah said, fine. If this is what you want, this is what I'll do. And Ruth could have also said, have a good trip, be safe, we'll miss you, but we understand why you want to go back to your homeland. There's nothing wrong with that response. Why should we feel obligated to go back to Judah with this woman who isn't even their mother? All they've ever known was Moab. They are Moabite women, yes. Their husbands had dual citizenships. But their citizenship, their cultural identity was in Moab. And we think, well, yeah, that sounds reasonable. However, for Orpah and Ruth to both want to go back to Bethlehem with Naomi is exceptional. And then for Ruth to insist that Naomi shouldn't make this journey alone is extraordinary. And this is why the book of Ruth is such an important part of the story of God's people. Ruth and Naomi's story is extraordinary. Now, last week we mentioned that it's appropriate that Advent season starts before winter solstice, because before we celebrate the birth of Christ, the one who is called the light of the world, we've got another 13 days of nights that get progressively darker until this year's solstice on December 21st. Oh boy, there goes the preacher again with the depressing stuff. It's fine. Well, okay, then we got to wait another 3 days before we have our candlelight vigil service or candlelight service with First Baptist. When the nights grow longer, sometimes it just feels like there's a big old weight on us. Some people get a little stir crazy as we wait for the world to kind of thaw out. I mean, that's what a lot of folks felt like during the pandemic, especially during those winter months. I mean, sure, spring and summer were fine. You could at least kind of get out and be in the outdoors. But the winters, they were the most difficult because we are sheltered in place. And that's why Advent season is so important. It's the season where we can affirm this ancient truth. We were never meant to walk these paths alone. That's the lesson of Ruth. Naomi was hurting. She was overwhelmed with hurt. She even renamed herself Mara, which means bitter. She was overcome by her loss and her grief. She believed that she was out of favor with God. She was determined to suffer alone. But Ruth chose to stay by Naomi's side, stubbornly. And Ruth's choice wasn't just about devotion. It marked the whole new formation of a new family that wasn't built on DNA. It was built on kinship. and it dared to believe that our lives are better lived in connection with one another. Now, sorrow can just make us shrink into ourselves and believe that solitude is safer than the vulnerability of connections. But when the weight of loneliness makes us feel forgotten to the point where we wonder if our place in this world even matters, it's really easy to get sucked up into the cascade of lies, right? We start thinking that we're the only ones carrying the weight of loneliness. We start thinking that we are the only one on the outside looking in. And it snowballs into other struggles like inadequacy and insecurity and insignificance. In fact, Vivek Murthy, who is our current Surgeon General in this country, once called loneliness an epidemic. He said loneliness not only hurts us on an individual level, but negatively impacts society as a whole. Feelings of isolation hurt our mental and physical health. Now, a study that Murthy was involved with in 2023 showed that loneliness can take the same toll on our bodies as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, we are better off together. Dr. Murthy says that if we fail to address this, we will pay an ever-increasing price in the form of our individual and collective health and well-being, and we will continue to splinter and divide until we can no longer stand as a community or a country. As the text from Ecclesiastes that Kevin read, two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. If one fails, there is somebody there to pick them up. Okay, Pastor, this is all well and good, but this is Advent. What in the heck does this have to do with anything related to Advent? Well, I'm glad you asked. Ruth and Naomi's journey to Bethlehem mirrors another future trek to the same town by Mary and Joseph. Both journeys are pilgrimages of faith. Both journeys hold the discomfort and uncertainty, and yet the travelers take it on together. This kinship between Ruth and Naomi echoes through the lineage of Jesus himself, because Ruth, a Moabite woman who embodied the strength of connection over isolation, is named among Jesus' ancestors. We are not alone, because others who have gone on before us and will go on after us have learned this lesson too. Turn to your neighbor and say, "You are not alone." Did that feel weird? I hope it doesn't. I hope, again, as last week, it is what you needed to hear today. Let us remember that for some, there is a shadow side to this season where we have all these lights and greenery. It can be a season filled with loneliness and grief for some, and just doesn't feel anything like the most wonderful time of the year. But this season does offer ample opportunities for kinship and connection. It is a time where we can reach out to those grieving. It is a time where we can invite those who are lonely into our homes and hearts, and to show them that in God's family, no one has to face their sorrows alone. What would it look like to build deeper connections in this season? And I'm not talking about holiday gatherings where we exchange pleasantries or gifts or whatever. This wisdom of Ecclesiastes that Kevin read reminds us that two are better than one. For if they fall, one will lift up the other. What if we were to build opportunities throughout the year for true human connection, no matter the relationship or what season of life we're in? You are not alone. In each other's companionship, may we find the reflection of the one who, in becoming flesh, chose to be with us, to share our humanity, and to show us that we need each other.